We are joined by Robert Hellmann, president of Hellmann Career Consulting. Robert has helped over 1,000 individuals to achieve career success and dozens of organizations to improve effectiveness via executive coaching and workshops. Please submit your questions to Robert via the Q&A feature within the Zoom controls at the bottom of your screen. And with that, I'll turn it over to Robert.
Thanks so much, Kathy. Welcome, everybody. So we have about an hour to talk about turning interviews into offers. And the way I wanted to do this with you all is to talk for about 45, 50 minutes about this and then take your questions at the end. And also just keep in mind that you can take notes and all that if you want, but there'll be a recording. Also, I'll be able to send you the slides right away. If you go to this link, you can actually do this at any time, bit.ly/CFA81121. And you'll be able to download the slides and have them right away. So you don't have to write everything down if you don't want to. You don't need to put www or HTTPS in front of this. Just type this right into any browser. So, okay. So I would encourage you to ask questions. And the way you do that is use the questions feature on the control panel, the Q&A feature, not chat. Use Q&A for your questions. I might be using chat for other things where I want your input on a couple of things. But so use the Q&A. You can type your questions in at any time. I'll answer them later on in the presentation. So I'm encouraging you to ask questions, but I'm going to start by asking you a question first. We're going to do a quick poll. The question is, true or false? The hiring decision is made within the first minute of the interview. So let me launch this poll. Okay. And go ahead, take a minute to give me your thoughts. Okay, I think that's about all the responses we'll get, at least right away. All right, let me end the poll. And here are the results. So you can see that the falses edged out the trues by a little bit. Now, who's right? Well, the answer is false. The falses have it. So sorry, trues. And the reason this is false is because unless you're way off, like, you come in totally disheveled or something like that, you have a lot of opportunity to turn a no into a yes, even after the interview is over. And we're going to talk about how you might do that. I've seen it happen many times when candidates were like initially a no, and then they got to yes. All right, we're going to talk about how to do that. So just keep that in mind. And it's often what you do after the interview that can be even more important than the interview itself, where these kinds of things, where this kind of magic can happen. So, all right, that said, let's get into this, how I'm going to talk about this presentation. So I'm breaking it up into 4 parts. The first part, we're going to talk about strategy. Then once you understand the strategy, how to prepare. Then what do you do at the interview? And then how do you follow up effectively where you can even turn a no into a yes? And you'll notice I say the goal, I don't say the goal is to get the offer. I say the goal is to get the next meeting. And the reason I say that is because, first of all, there are 2 reasons. One, I don't want you to close too early. If you're thinking about, I got to do well in this interview so I get the offer, you might start negotiating salary before it's time and things like that. You don't want to do that. And the second thing is you'll be less nervous if you're just thinking about this in terms of getting the next meeting. And that's really what the mindset you need to have. Like if you're just thinking, if you just keep getting more meetings and they keep wanting to talk to you, eventually you're going to get the offer. So that's the right attitude here that you want to have. So, all right, let's jump into the strategy. And the first sort of eye opener here is that there is a strategy. It's not like you're just going in, like trying to, like any typical interviewee, trying to memorize the answer to every possible question, prepare 3 questions that you ask at the end to show them how smart you are, or maybe you waste a lot of time talking about things that have nothing to do with what the interviewer's challenges or problems are and how you can help. So that's what like interviewees, often do wrong, is they just feel like, the interviewer has all the leverage. They just they don't take an opportunity to control the conversation. They're very reactive, and that's not what you want to do, okay? What you want to do instead of this approach is to take a consultative sales approach. It's a consultative sales strategy that you want to employ. So really, if anybody's been a consultant, you may know what I'm talking about here. You really, in any interview situation, you want to think and act like a consultant. So what I mean by that is you want to have a conversation, a dialogue. That's your goals. Like, they ask you a question, you answer it. Then you ask them a question, then they answer it. Then they ask you a question. Go back and forth. You want to have a conversation about their challenges and problems, so you can then show them how you can help them with those challenges and problems, right? So the way you want to do this, just like any consultant would do, is you want to do research to figure out like what they might need help with. What's your hypothesis before you even go into that interview, that meeting, about what that particular person's challenge is. And each person might have a different problem or challenge that they're trying to solve that you interview with. So you want to think about that. Then you're going to ask questions to see if you're right about that hypothesis, or they need help with something else. But at least you'll be asking the right questions, and you'll be learning. The most important thing is to learn how you can help them. And then lastly, you want to show them how you can help them, ideally through sharing examples of your success, success stories, right? Specific examples. We're going to talk a lot about that. Or making it tangible in a different way by saying, literally, here's what I would do the first 90 days when I came on board. But you got to be careful with that. We'll talk a little bit about that later. That's what I mean by consultative sales. It's like you're keeping the focus on how you can help them. That's the name of the game. If you're doing anything else other than focusing on how you can help them through your questions or through showing them via your stories or telling them what you would do, you're wasting your time or hurting yourself, okay? And last thing you want to do, just like any consultant would do, like a consultant would follow up with a proposal, right? Now, you don't always have to think of it as a proposal in an interview, but you want to have a really powerful follow-up. We'll talk a lot about that too, okay? So just to feed into this strategy here, your mindset is super important. You really want to take the attitude like you already have the job, you're on the same side of the table as them, you're just there to help them solve their problems. Not only will you be less nervous if you do this, but you'll be naturally focused on what they care most about, which is, how can you help me, right? That's what they want to know, and you'll be answering it naturally if you take this approach, this mindset. And if you have this mindset, you'll be answering their number one question, how can you help me? In fact, any interviewer only has 3 questions they're looking to get answered. And whatever you think they're asking you, it's going to fall into one of these 3 buckets. How can you help me, which is number 1. Then why do you want to work here? Meaning, are you going to stick around? Are you going to leave in 6 months? Are you motivated? And so on. And will you fit in? Okay. So when you prepare, you want to think about these 3 things. So anyway, that's the strategy. Now, with understanding the strategy, you'll be better able to prepare. So preparation is obviously super important in an interview. And what I would think about with preparation is make it like a checklist. There's a bunch of things you want to go through. The first one we're going to dive into a little bit now, how to handle issues they might have with your candidacy. But the other things you can prepare in advance, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail, like questions you want to ask, your pitch, the examples of success stories you're going to share, and your motivation, why you want to work there, right? So let's talk about issues, how to handle issues they might have with your candidacy. Is there anything that you're afraid they're going to bring up? Anything that might make them, that you hate that they ask, you always have trouble answering the question, that kind of thing, right? In fact, you know what? Why don't you use the chat feature? And if any of you want to just share the issues you think they might have with your candidacy when you go on interviews, I'll try to tell you how to answer those specific challenges right now. So click chat and type in, what issues you are faced with in interviews that always make you uncomfortable. And hopefully you can see the chat feature. You just click the chat on the control panel and just type in issues. Okay, I'm seeing one, a gap in employment. Let me see if there are any other ones that come up. Okay. Okay, great. So these are good. These are great ones. All right, so I'm going to just go through a couple of them just to illustrate. It's like a strategy. And when I show you, like, a lot of these are similar. So all right, that's enough now. I got it. Thank you. This is great. You'll get it from the original these initial responses. Thank you. So let's talk about the first one, which is gap in employment. And someone else said, why were you out of work or consulting for several years? It's kind of similar, right? Okay, so let's talk about those two first. And that's a pretty common one, right? So what you need to do, if you're not focused on how you can help them, as I said before, you're either wasting your time or hurting yourself. So when you get questions like this, like a gap in employment, for example, what you want to do is prepare in advance, have an answer prepared because you know it's likely going to come up, and answer the question briefly. Talk less, not more, and then change the subject back to them. So I'll just give you an example, just a hypothetical. So I see you've been out of work for like or it looks like you haven't been working for like a year. You know, what have you been doing? What have you been up to? Well, now, if maybe you've been looking unsuccessfully for a job for a year, right? You don't want to say that. You can say, well, I've been looking, but it's been really tough. The market's hard. It's been, just no jobs. Like, negativity is a no-no. So that's another rule here. I'll be giving you two rules. One rule is keep the focus on how you can help them, right? Through your questions and through your examples, your stories. The other rule is keep things as positive as possible. So this is where you need to spin it a little bit. Like, you got to think about the job search as all sales and marketing. You want to be the best salesperson in the world for yourself, and the best marketer in the world. And interviewing in particular is sales. It's that consultative sales. So what that means is you talk less about the things that aren't going to help you, and not more, and then change the subject back to how you can help them, or ask them, or telling them why you want to work there, something they care about. You might say, yeah, look, I left a year ago. You could even, to focus, I had some things, I took some time off to, focus on my family and some family issues, especially with COVID. It was a good time to just take care of some of those things. But now I'm really ready to jump back in the workforce, and I'm very excited to be talking to you because, and then tell them why you want to work there. And then ask them a question because, so tell them why you want to work there because of some specific reason about, the culture, you read about the culture, or the challenge you're facing is something I can really help with. And I want to ask you a little bit more about X. That's it. Change the subject, get off of this and focus on this, on why you want to work there and on their problems and issues through your question. That's how you do it, right? You have great experience when we do things just a little differently here. Well, just a little differently, it sounds like they're thinking you don't have the experience doing things the way they do them. So what you want to do is try to, preempt that by using words and phrases that will resonate with the interviewer. So, I'd have to have a little bit more detail than this little, this thing you posted. But it sounds like, the idea is if you think that your experience doesn't lie, I work with clients on this kind of thing all the time, it's common. I'm just working with a client who's like, just coming into my mind because we spend a lot of time in this, who's really fantastic at strategy. He's looking to move into another senior strategic leadership role at a consulting firm. He doesn't have consulting experience, right? He doesn't literally have consulting experience. So that always comes up as an issue. Like, yeah, well, look, you don't have consulting on your resume, even though he's essentially been a consultant throughout his career for internal clients, and he could hit the ground running, no problem. So how we combat that, and it's worked for him, is to use the language of consultants in the interview process. So he talks about things like when I consult with my internal clients, when I advise them, we take a strategic approach. We use this consulting framework. He uses the words that are going to make him think, oh, he gets what it's like to be a consultant. So I hope that helps you to answer your question here. Let's see what else you got here. So just looking at some of the other ones, I think you're getting the idea, right? Too long in the same position. Well, I don't know if that's usually it's not an issue that you're in there too long. Maybe you're concerned they're going to think that's an issue. Or that you can get promoted. I guess that's what they're thinking, is you can get promoted. Well, that may be something that they're thinking. They may not say it. If they say it, you could say, I turned down, maybe you can make up something. You could say, I turned down a promotion. Or that was just, you know what? That was just the way this company was organized. I either had to do this job or leave. And I loved the job. It was fantastic for a long time, but now I'm ready to do something a little bit different. Just something to get past it and then change the subject. And I want to do something a little bit different. And that's why I'm excited to be talking to you and tell them why you want to work there and then ask them a question. That's how you do it, right? North of age 50, that's usually not an issue. Like age, it's usually something else, right? Like it's not about age so much as maybe you're coasting to retirement. You're not going to give it your all. So they're thinking you're not going to be as motivated to work hard. Or maybe they're going to think you want too much money. Or maybe they're going to think you are going to be uncomfortable working for somebody 20 years younger than you. Those are usually the issues. When you think it's age, it's really not the number, it's those things. The way you combat all three of those things, there's one way, is showing enthusiasm, showing you're really into it. Show that you get them, that you understand what they're trying to do, that you're really excited about taking on this challenge, you're best positioned to help them. And they'll forget all about the fact that they'll forget all about all these issues. They'll say, oh, all right, maybe the money is so important. He's so motivated, or she's so motivated to take this role that it's probably that shouldn't be an issue. And she totally gets us. And so I don't think that there's going to be an issue with motivation. It's clear that they're going to be working hard and they'll fit right in. So that's how you combat that, right? That's how you address that. Okay. Anyway, so that's it. And if you have other questions about this, put them in the, post them in the Q&A or ask me later, right? But that's how you approach this, okay? Now, questions you want to ask, interview pitch, your success stories, and why you want to work there. Let's go through each of these. When you, so this is what we just discussed, right? You want to pivot back to change the subject back to them, why you want to work there, and ask them a question. Now, the questions you want to ask, what you want to do is get research to get information about the people you're working with. Then you want to form up a hypothesis about each person's issues, what we were starting to discuss before. And each person, might have a slightly different thing. So, if you're going for like a, if you're going for a VP of finance role and you meet with the CFO, who's going to be your boss, well, that's one hypothesis. Now, if they have you meet with marketing, that marketing may be looking for something a little bit different. Like, will you approve their budgets, right? Than the CFO is looking for. If you meet with HR, they might be looking for some even a third set of things, right? Because they don't know the job so well. So maybe they're thinking about cultural fit, problems with your resume, things like that, right? Each person might have a little bit of a different take on what they're looking for, and you want to think about that ahead of time. And then you want to ask the questions to see if you're right about what they need help with, okay? So the questions that come to mind for me, like, this isn't rocket science. This is not about asking questions to impress them. I get that sometimes from clients, like, oh, I wanted to ask this question because I thought it would really impress them. No, that's not what you want to do. What you want to do is ask questions that help you learn how you can help them. Then you'll be impressing them by showing them how you can help them, right? And the questions will be great because you'll be focused on what they want to talk about, which is, here's what we need help with. Can you do it? Can you help us? So anything that can, starting with like, what do you need help with, right? Like, what do you need my help with right away? How about 6 months down the road? What about the people who succeed in this role? What are they like? What are the characteristics of those people? Like, anything so you can understand what they're looking for, how you can help them. Because if you don't understand that, then you can't make the sale. You can't close the deal, right? You can't get the offer. how will my success be measured? That's an important question, because that'll really get you to understand exactly what you need to do to help them. Okay, so what is my success? What is a year from now? How are we going to know I'm successful? That's the way you can ask it. Who will I be interacting with and how? What does a typical day look like? You can ask that. Like, you don't have to ask all these questions. I mean, ask that one if you're still uncertain about the role after you've talked about it for a while. You might get drilled down to what does a typical day look like. And there are a whole bunch of other questions you can come up with based on your research. These are just like sort of the high level questions, but you do other research about what they're doing at their company and their competitors, and you ask questions much more specific about, the job itself, right? So anyway, now, so that's that. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is your pitch, which is your answer to any open-ended question. Your interview pitch is the answer to any question like, tell me about yourself, tell me about your background, tell me about your experience, why should we hire you, even take me through your resume. Because these questions, like, there's lots of ways to answer them. And this is an opportunity for you to come up with a really well-rehearsed answer that's engaging, and that shows why you're better than the competition. And so it's very important you create this pitch. Now, even if they never ask you an open-ended question like this, and these are pretty common questions, but you may not get them in every interview, even if they don't, it's still valuable for you to create this interview pitch, because it's going to force you to create your value proposition, like, why should they hire me versus the competition? You'll have it clear in your mind, and it will come out in the interview. It's a very important exercise to go through, even if you never have to give it. Okay, but very likely you are going to be giving your pitch, if not in the interview you have now, then the next one or the one after that. So when you create a pitch, it's roughly 2 minutes. Think about it like 2 minutes, and you want to make it conversational. You don't want to make it sound like you're reading from a script. So initially, when you first create your pitch, you're going to write it out, and you're going to practice it over and over, and it'll sound like you're reading from a script. It'll sound terrible. And you should do that. Like, the way it's worked for clients, and even for me, is, the first 45 minutes or so, you're practicing it over and over, and it just sounds awful, and you can't remember it. All of a sudden, those last 15 minutes, it starts to click. And then, especially if you sleep on it, the next morning, it's going to be really in your head, and you'll be able to say it in a very conversational way. And here are the 6 elements of the pitch, okay? Now, I could talk for 2 hours easily on the pitch. We don't have 2 hours. We only have a couple of more minutes to talk about this. But I want you to get you to start thinking about your pitch so you can take this and work on it more on your own, okay? Now, we're going to talk about, so these are the 6 elements. The branding and the hook, that's the hardest part. That's where you might sometimes get creative, because what you want to do is you want to think about your pitch like a mini presentation. And any good presentation, you want to hook them in right away. You want to grab their attention. So that's what I'm talking about, like your hook. What's your hook for your pitch? So they're paying attention, you're waking up, and they're not distracted, and they'll listen to you after they ask you, tell me about yourself. Once you give your hook, it's like, how should they categorize you? Like, what box are you in the org chart? That's super easy. Like, just make them understand who you are as a portfolio manager or as a finance director, whatever. What differentiates you? Number of years of experience. Like, I bring 15 years of experience doing A, B, C, X, Y, and Z. Just list out the things, right? The examples to back it up. Let me give you a couple of examples so you can see how I can help you. This is where you're going to introduce your stories. You're not going to tell your whole success story here because you don't have time, but you want to make it like a teaser. You want to introduce it. You want to do something like, well, when I was at this company, I did X, which resulted in Y. I also did A, which resulted in B. And at the prior company, I did C, which resulted in D. Just so they say, oh, X, which resulted in Y. That's very interesting. Tell me more about that. Then you tell them the whole story. That's the purpose here, is to introduce the stories, make it like a teaser, get them curious. Then number 5 is like something like a conclusion, like, the reason I've been successful or underlying my success is, and come up with something, in addition to my finance acumen and all that, I'm a good, I know how to work with people. I know how to build relationships. I'm a good at leading teams, and, something like, whatever it is. I'm making stuff up, right? Do what's real for you. And then lastly, you turn it back to them, which means you say, and I'm excited to be talking to you because, and then tell them why you want to work there. And make sure when you tell them why you want to work there, by the way, you're specific. You don't want to say like your company is great. Anybody could say that about any company. It doesn't sound authentic. So you want to say because, and be specific about why. And if you can, make it beyond just saying because I think I can help you. Say something specifically about the company or the department or the culture or something. I like how you've been always cutting edge or whatever it is, something real to them. You turn it back to them, tell them why you want to work there, and then ask them a question. That's the outline for the pitch. Let's talk about this hook thing. So the hook, you want to grab their attention. I'm going to give you some examples just to get you thinking. So here's an example. So I had one client who was a director of business analysis, and she said, I said, at first her pitch was something like, yes, I bring, 15 years of experience in business analysis. I said, all right, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But can you do something a little bit more powerful? What's the essence of your value? What do you truly bring to the organizations you work for? She said, well, I lead teams in turning data into actionable knowledge that moves the business forward. That became her hook, the thing that said, that's interesting. Tell me more. I want to hear more. Right? Then she goes into the 15 years of experience, right? Similarly, with this insurance analyst, risk underwriter, he started off in a kind of conventional way. And I asked him the same set of questions. He said, well, I view my job as turning uncertainty into opportunity. Fantastic opening. Use that to hook people, right? I'm an energy insider for this learning and development VP. Organizational learning is a journey. I view that as a journey, and I'm the person who provides the map to help the organization get there. I had an IT VP who said, what is the essence of your value? What truly makes you great? And she said, I can make PCs dance. I said, fantastic. Great opening. Okay. That's what I'm challenging you to do. Try to come up with something like this. It's not easy, but give it a shot and come up with something engaging. Then the rest of your pitch is much more straightforward. In fact, if you do your resume the right way, it could be like the summary section of your resume. Now, this is an example of a summary section. This is not a resume webinar, but just to show you, like in the summary section, this finance director, this heading here, finance director, oh, I'm a finance director, right? You mentioned that in your pitch, right? Categorizes you. This differentiates you, CFA chart holder, all this stuff, right? This is a client who was targeting media companies. That's why she listed Viacom and NBC Universal and HarperCollins. Then examples to back it up. She pulled out like 3 bullets from here and to put in her pitch, right? And then underline his success, people view me as someone who can really motivate a team. I'm exceptional leader, right? Motivate a team, and that's been a big reason for my success. So I could even do a pitch from this, right? Just to take one of the other, the hooks from before, I might do something. If they said, tell me about yourself, or tell me why we should hire you. Well, I'm someone who, as a finance director, has consistently been able to turn data into actionable insights and knowledge that have moved the business forward. I bring over 10 years of experience in the media industry, and that includes Viacom, NBC Universal, and HarperCollins. I'm also a CFA charter holder. My experience is pretty broad, includes M&A, FP&A, forecasting, and more. But I'd like to give you a couple of examples just so you could see how I can help you. So just to take a recent example, when I was at Viacom, I had a key role in this division's restructuring that resulted in a profit growth from negative 10% to plus 15%. In fact, I received an award for that. I also had an opportunity to reduce costs by as much as 25% while protecting and enhancing revenue sources. And and I developed also something else you want to know is I have a very global experience where I've managed and led teams in the US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Asia. And I think people would say about me, if you talk to them, that the reason I've been successful is that I'm a strong leader. I know how to motivate teams. I've had high retention of top performers, and I'm excited to be talking to you. Anyway, you see, I didn't practice this in advance for this webinar. I am totally doing this off the cuff. I'm just paraphrasing the notes I have here. That's what you need to do. Create an outline, just practice it over and over until it's totally in your head. Okay? Just like I did. I promise you, I just did this right now. Okay? And you probably could do a much better job than I did with this outline if you practiced it. So that's how you do your pitch. Okay, just again, for anybody that came on late, if you want to get the slides, just go to this link, bit.ly/CFA81121, and you can get the slides. So now we're going to talk about something that's super, super important. In fact, I would say if there was just one thing you could do that would give you the greatest impact in terms of improving your odds of getting an offer, I would say tell a great story. So let's talk about stories, like your success stories, your examples. Now, you don't need 15 different success stories. In fact, I don't want you to have 15 different success stories because you're not going to get good at telling any one of them. It's too many. 3 is plenty. It makes you sound like you won't be a one-trick pony if you have 3 success stories. It's enough variety, and you need to practice them just like you're going to practice the pitch. Make it completely comfortable and engaging and interesting. Introduce them in your pitch, and try to use them to answer every question. So we're going to talk. What I mean by that is, we're jumping ahead a little bit, but say you get an interview question like, a typical boring interview question like, what's your greatest strength? You've probably gotten that one before. So you could straight up answer. So my clients, when I do mock interviews with them, I ask them that question. They say, wow, you're putting me on the spot. I didn't prepare for that. I don't know. They start thinking about what's my greatest strength. What do I say? What do I say? I say, listen, you're thinking about it the wrong way. You don't need to prepare for the answer to what is your greatest strength. What you need to do is prepare the story. You want to have a very well-rehearsed story at your fingertips, and you should be I challenge you with every question you get to try to think, can I use this question as an opportunity to share one of my success stories to illustrate my answer? That's what I challenge you to do with every question. Try to see if you can bring in one of your stories. And what's your greatest strength is a great question to bring in a success story. And then it becomes like not what is the right answer. Like anything is the right answer as long as you can bring in your story. You could just say anything that'll help you to segue into the story. You know why? Because they are not going to remember the answer to what is your greatest strength. That they're not going to remember that. It's going to go in one ear and out the other. What they're going to remember is the story you told. It's the imageries in the story that we are wired to remember as humans. That's why you want to make your stories, dramatic, engaging, make them important, okay? And so they'll be memorable, even emotional if you can. Just like any good story that you ever read in a book or saw in a movie or whatever, it's the same idea. And so I challenge you to try to lead with this, try to get the stories heard and answer the questions in a way that you can share a story as an example. So the correct answer to what is your greatest strength? Oh, my greatest strength is X. Let me give you an example and then tell the story. Tell the story that illustrates X, okay? That's how you do it. And the way to make these stories is dramatic, engaging, and important is to do it using some kind of a storytelling format. I like PAR because it's simple. The problem, action, result. Because any great story has these 3 elements. And what you want to do is with the problem, make it a big deal, right? Show that what you were doing was important. Then show how you were thoughtful in the action you took to solve this problem. And then the result, make it super big deal as well. They lived happily ever after, right? Like make it like, tie the result and the problem to the bottom line. I mean, you're all like doing something finance related. So that's easy there, and they're going to want that, right? Because it's the nature of what you do. So I'm going to give you an example of this in a second, but common story mistakes include there's too much detail. So you should think of each of these stories as also roughly 2 minutes in length. And you don't want to put too much detail in there that become too long, and then they're going to get boring. There's also too much jargon in there. Like you start using all these abbreviations and things that they don't know. And that's like, there's even a term for this called the curse of knowledge. You can look it up. You can Google it. You'll see pages and pages on it where you assume that everybody has the same amount of knowledge as you. So be careful of that. Too little detail, that usually means it's probably too short. That means it's not interesting enough. This is a very common problem. So I have clients when they first share their stories with me, it's like, so first we did this, then we did that, then we did this other thing, so I'm not hearing what you did. If you're saying we, you could have done almost nothing if it's we. Or you could have had a major leadership role. You could have had a key role. So you've got to put I in there. You got to be careful to not just do we, and have the word I in there. Like I led my team, I work with my team, I work with the business units. If it was we, say it that way. Okay? You got to get you in there so they understand what you did. So you forget to tie the problem and the result to the bottom line. We just talked about that. Also, there's too little action. So problem, action, result. Take them on your journey. Like make them understand like what you do when you're faced with a problem, how you're strategic, how you're thoughtful. So I'll just give you a quick example. So I had a client who's like an account manager. And they said, some question, like, whatever. She said, give me an example of the kind of things you've been doing. Or she said, sure. She said, because she's always thinking about bringing a story in, right? She said, well, let me give you this example. If they say, give me an example, you got your stories. That's perfect, right? But, whatever the question was that they asked, I said, sure, let me give you this example. So we had now when she first gave the example, it wasn't good. She said, I had a client, one of my clients, I found out that they were going to leave, and they were an important client. So I got my team together. We created this presentation, and I ultimately was able to convince them to stay. So it's just not enough detail. It's not interesting enough. It's not terrible. It's better than nothing, but it could be she's missing a big opportunity here. So we worked on this story a little bit. So I said, problem, action, result. So we started with the problem. So she said, after we worked on it, well, I had this client who was giving our company about 1/3 of our revenue. They've been with us since our company's founding. It was super important to us, especially as we were trying to get bought or get investors. And I found out, because I had so many great contacts at this company through the grapevine, it wasn't even official. I found out that they were looking to go to a competitor, which would have absolutely scuttled any chance of us getting bought. It would have devastated our P&L if they went to a competitor. So now you see how big, now they're paying attention, right? Your audience, like, whoa, that's a big problem, right? So you say, then she said, I knew I couldn't let them go. So it would have been too painful. So the first thing I did, so in terms of how to keep them, I approached it in 3 ways. First, I had to understand what the problem was. Like, why did they want to leave? What was this competitor offering? Then I had to buy time to come up with some solution. And thirdly, I had to come up with a compelling proposal. I have to lead my team in doing that. You see how she's being strategic? She's saying 3 things. It could be 2 things or 1 thing, but she's saying, I approach this problem in a thoughtful, strategic way. That's what you want to do. So then she went into detail in each of those 3 things. So, when she said, so in order to understand what the problem was, I got more detail through my contacts. Anyway, I don't have to go through the whole thing. She said, I bought some time. I led my team in coming up with a great proposal. We went to them. We led to a series of meetings that, I was there. My team was there. I had even at one time, a couple of other C-level executives came in support. And we offered them something, our solution, because the competitor really had a great solution that we couldn't compete with. We just weren't ready. But we could offer them something else that the competitor wasn't able to, that was so great that it was way better than anything the competitor was even offering them. And they bought that. That was our approach that they bought. So the result was, not only did they stay, but they ended up giving us even more revenue. They became even a bigger part of our company's revenue profile. And that we ultimately, the fact that we were able to keep them led to the successful sale of the company. And that's why I'm talking to you, right? Do you see how much more powerful that was? She tied the problem and the result to the bottom line. She took them on their journey into the action. That's how you tell a good story, okay? And she used I and all that. All right, let's talk now a little bit about difficult interview questions. So the way I started to talk with you about this already. First off, it's not what is the right answer. It's not what is the right answer. It is about, it's like, you gotta think of it like a game. And the way you win at the game, this interview game, is to keep the focus on how you can help them through your stories, through sharing examples of your success and learning how you can help them, right, through your questions, so then you can show them. So in order to play that game to win, what you got to do is reprogram your brain. And I mean this because it's not instinctive. Like your instinctive thought is think, oh, they have all the leverage. They're interviewing all these other candidates. I better just answer the literal question they just asked me. Maybe I should just memorize the answers to every possible question. No, you don't want to do that. You want the stories, right? So the first thing you should be thinking about with every question is, can I use this question to show how I can help them using one of my success stories? Now, if you can't, like if they say, why have you been not working for a year? Or why is there this big gap in your resume? Or, something like that, right? You can't say, there's no opportunity to ask, or why'd you leave your last employer? Well, you can't bring in a story to answer those questions. So just like we illustrated earlier on with the answers to those questions, you are brief in your answer it briefly, and then change the subject, turn it back to them, tell them why you want to work there and ask them a question. And sometimes you could sidestep the question, answer it a little bit differently. We'll talk about that in a second. So that's how you got to reprogram your brain. Okay, let's try and do this. So I got a client once who said, Rob, I had this interview and they asked me this question. I had no idea how to answer it. How would you answer it? How would you find a needle in a haystack? So I said, well, I'm going to apply this method here. I've already reprogrammed my brain to think about how I can bring a story in to answer this question. So you might try and answer it by saying, well, recently we had a situation where this whole thing stopped working and we couldn't figure out what was wrong. And it was like trying to find a needle in a haystack to figure out the solution. And here's what I did and it was an opportunity for her to tell her story, So that's the best way to do it. That's how you need to think about these, right? These are just typical, like weird questions, right? Like if you were a car, what car you could be, right? If you were an animal, what kind of animal you could be, who cares? What they care about is how can you help them? Don't worry about that. So it doesn't matter what kind of car, just say any car, just say the car that's, never breaks down and gets you there, and gets you there super quickly, because that's the way I approach my job, and if you want, I can give you an example of that, like how I'm somebody who's super dependable, and at the same time, very, very efficient and quick to, and then you tell one of your stories, right? So just say something that'll help you to tell your story, tell me about yourself, we already discussed, what your greatest strength, why should we hire you? Same thing, open-ended question, just like tell me about yourself. Now, give me an example from your experience that's relevant to what we're trying to do. That's a gift. They're saying, please tell me one of your stories. Now, the next few, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, they're all the same question. They're asking you to say something negative about yourself, like what's your greatest weakness? Give me an example of a time you failed, and give me an example of an assignment you weren't proud of. Number 7, I'm sorry, is not the same. Number 7, an obstacle you face. Every one of your stories is about an obstacle you face, right? So just tell them one of your stories. It's another gift. But 8, 9, 10, and 11 are all the same. What criticism your boss gave you. Pick the way you answer these questions, and this is something you should prepare for in advance, is to pick something you learned about yourself a long time ago, not recently. Then show them how that learning helped you ever since and end on a success, right? So pick something that, don't pick something recent because it might sound like it's still relevant, early on in my career, 20 years ago when I first started, like my boss gave me this criticism, or I realized that I wasn't doing this one thing, and it was such a wake-up call for me, and that's helped me ever since. And That's why I've been so effective at my job all these years, because I had that learning. I always keep it top of mind. Something like that. Okay? If they ask, how have you dealt with a difficult boss? Well, this is where you can sort of sidestep it. Like, because remember I said negativity is a no-no. Keep things as positive as possible. It's one of the golden rules. Difficult boss is negative. Do you have to buy into that negativity? I would say no. I mean, if they ask what your greatest weakness is, you can't say, I don't have a weakness, because then it just sounds arrogant, right? You can't do that. But difficult boss, you can say, you know, I never saw any of my bosses as difficult. I saw them as challenging, and I love a challenge. And then I can give you an example, then tell one of your success stories. Similarly, you know, do you prefer a manager who's hands-on or hands-off? Do you have to have a preference? I mean, if you say, I like one, then you're saying you don't like the other. Not a good idea. You know, you're taking a risk. I think you get the idea, right? So, okay. Now, if they get off topic, like you start talking too much about your hometown, or you both play tennis or whatever it is, you know, that's not good, because you got to find a place to show them how you can help them at some point in the interview. So yeah, it's good to maybe as an icebreaker for 5 minutes, because they want people they like to work with. But at some point, you got to focus on how you can help them, or you're not going to get the offer. I had a client recently who went through exactly this. He said, oh, it was a great interview, but I said, and this is after the interview, he said it was a great interview. And I said, well, what do they need help with? He said, we never really got to that. Then it wasn't a great interview. And he never got the offer, by the way. He never got another interview after that, because somebody else did tell them how they can help. So they got the other interview and ultimately the offer. Okay? So you gotta find a way to refocus the conversation. I was curious, by the way, I look for a space, right? And say, I was curious about something I read or something based on the job posting, ask them a question, to focus on how you can help. And they'll like that. It's just some people are just not good interviewers, Okay, now what do they ask about salary? What do you do? Well, what you don't do is give a number right away. You don't want to negotiate salary or talk numbers ideally until after you get the offer, because right now they have all the leverage. After you get the offer, you have all the leverage. They want you to start yesterday. They're not thinking of anyone else but you. And all these things that weren't negotiable before are suddenly negotiable, okay? And also, you don't know the whole compensation picture yet when they're talking about money. So it's just premature to be talking about this kind of stuff. So if they ask you, what are you looking for? The first thing you should do is try to not answer it, okay? What are you looking for? Oh, salary isn't going to be an issue. I know we're both reasonable. We're both fair. We'll be able to work something out. That's the first thing you should say. That's going to work half the time. They'll say, okay. But so 50% of the time it'll work. The other 50%, they'll say, well, I know you say that, and I appreciate that, but we do really need a number to see if we should move forward. Well, then you can say one of two things. And I actually prefer the second thing, but you can do either one. You can say, like, look, I'm looking to get paid the market rate for this role. I'm still doing my due diligence on what the market rate is, what others would pay, like your competitors would pay for something like this, for this job. I haven't completed my due diligence. I guess you have. So what do you budgeted for this role? What's your range for the role? Turn it back to them. They'll give a range, and even if it's a little low, just say we'll be able to work something out. Unless it's ridiculously low, then you have to say something. If even it's a little on the low side, just say we'll be able to work something out. Because usually you can, or often you can. Maybe not usually, depending on how low it is. But because the negotiating leverage will switch to you after the interview, once they make you the offer, you often can negotiate those differences. Okay? And then if they say, look, I know you say we'll be able to work something out, but we really need a number. Now they're getting impatient. By the third time, you have to give them something. So give them a broad range. Okay? That's your script. Now, we're getting towards the end here. And what I want to say is, just remember to be careful not to be a know-it-all. If you don't want to go in there saying, like, you guys should really do this, or you should do that. Always sort of phrase things as like a question, like, have you ever thought about this? Or this worked for us in my company. Maybe you think it might work for you? Like, try to pose your ideas and your in a more humble way. Just be careful because clients get tripped up. Now, towards the end of the interview, these are 2 questions you must ask. We're getting to the last part of the 4 parts, which is, the follow-up, right? And in order to do the follow-up, you gotta understand if they have any issues with your candidacy. The sale begins after the customer tells you what their objections are. So you're thinking the interview went great, and they're thinking, well, Rob he's a really nice guy, but these other candidates, there's one other candidate in particular has more experience in X, so we're gonna lean towards her. So you gotta understand what those issues might be before you walk out of that interview so you can address them. This is often where you get the information you need to turn a no into a yes. So you should ask, just so I'm clear on what you're looking for, I'm curious as to how I compare with the other candidates. Ask that question. A related question, how do you feel about moving my candidacy forward? Ask both these questions. Super, super important. The only time they'll feel uncomfortable with answering these questions is if there's no way you're ever going to get the job because there's some interpersonal issue or something like that. But if you're even remotely close, they'll be happy to answer these questions. And you'll have what you need to make the sale if there's any issue. So that leads to the follow-up, which is way, way more than a thank you letter. I don't want you to write thank you letters anymore. I want you to write influence letters, in particular, influence emails. By letter, I mean email, okay? So an influence email, influence letter, it's personal, it's targeted to them, brings up things you forgot to bring up, or you didn't do justice to, addresses objections in a positive way, shows you heard them, and all that, right? So it's very personal. It's not like you can't write just one form influence letter and send it to everybody. It's got to be about how you can help that person who you met with, okay? So it's very important in the interview that you listen for their needs, their challenges, their issues, what objections they might have, and anything you can learn about the competition. So you can use this as the raw material for your follow-up, okay? So I'm going to give you an example, and I don't want you to read this yet. You can read it on your own, but I'm going to set the stage, and then I'm going to take your questions. So one example, I had a client, Julie. She was looking to direct this business development team, and she had a bunch of great meetings, and they seemed like they loved her, she loved them. Then she had one more meeting with the executive vice president, the number 2 person at the company, and she thought it went really well. And at the end of the meeting, she asked one of those 2 questions I told you to ask, right? She said, how do you feel about moving my candidacy forward in the process? And he said, frankly, we're not going to move you forward. And she was shocked. She's like, what? Really? I'm so surprised. I thought I had great conversations with your team. He said, yeah, well, we really need someone who can really dive into the data and do some analytics, some sales analytics to direct the sales team. And I don't see that you have that analytic background. And she didn't know that was part of the job. She's like shocked. She's like, oh, I didn't know that was what you're looking for. You know what? I'll address that. So we got together after the interview and we wrote a fantastic influence email. I say fantastic. Well, you'll see, you'll be the judge of whether it's fantastic. But we wrote an influence email that addressed that issue, right? About analytic experience. So we don't have to go through the whole thing, but it's all about, analytics. I offer superior analytic ability, but this is the key point I want to point to. That she says, if you're amenable, I propose that I analyze some of the department spreadsheets containing sales data. I'll present my findings to you. Happy to sign any confidentiality agreement or feel free to alter their numbers if necessary. She sent this email. So she's saying, this is way beyond thank you, you can see, right? She sent this email, didn't hear from the guy for a week, figured, oh, he's not interested. All of a sudden, she gets an email back from him a week later, okay, here. And he had attached the sales data. So she had 3 days and 3-day weekend to analyze the heck out of the sales data. She emailed her results and her recommendations based on her analysis and said, I'm going to set up a meeting to discuss these results with you. Very important what she did. She didn't just say, looking forward to your thoughts. If you do the work, if they ask you to do some kind of work or something, you should always get on their calendar to discuss it, okay? And that's what she did. You want to be very proactive throughout your job search. Don't just wait for stuff to come to you over their response. So she got on his calendar. The next meeting, They hardly even talked about the results. They had a really great conversation. Then she said, how do you feel about moving me forward? And he said, I feel great about moving you forward. You're one of the top candidates. She's like, wow, all of a sudden I'm one of the top candidates. Then she said, I'm just curious how I compare with the other candidates. And he said, well, look, even though you're one of the top candidates, this one other guy has done exactly this job before and you haven't, so we're leaning towards him. So what did she do? She wrote another influence email, which talked about her unique competitive advantage that nobody else had. Even though she couldn't argue that she had done the job before, she couldn't say that. She could talk about what she brings to the table that no other candidate has, including this other person. She ended up getting the offer. And she accepted it, So you can read this stuff on your own. Here's another example I included in here. And here's one that's interesting. This is about a client who, after they turned him down, we're narrowing our search down to folks who've done this exact job. We'll be back in touch if we open up or expand the scope. He didn't take that as a no. He said, look, I hear you. Thanks for your candor, but keep these points in mind. They ended up bringing him back, and he actually ended up getting an offer. So that's how powerful these follow-ups can be. Okay? So anyway, here's a link to get the slides and my books, my email. Let me take some questions. I'm going to go look at the Q&A now. So type in your questions. Oh, here's one. What's the right balance between highlighting my success and being humble? It's a fantastic question, and I appreciate that. So the way they want you to highlight your success. So thank you so the way you want to do it is you need to talk about your success. You need to talk about the results, but you want to talk about it in a factual way. You don't want to say, I'm really great at this, or I'm excellent at that. You could say, I can help you with this because I've had a lot of success doing this exact same thing. Let me give you an example and then sort of quantify it, right? If you bring in the evidence, it's not bragging. So you don't want to be, what I mean by being humble is if you're proposing, if you have ideas for their business, be humble in terms of how you present it, okay? That's very important, okay? So that's what I mean. I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, please ask it again, and I'll answer it again or expand on it. Other questions? Feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A. Not seeing any other questions here. Oh, here's a couple in the chat feature. I'll do that one. What do you do if an online application insists on a salary? I would give a low number. You can always, give a low number and just say notate that number, okay? And say, you can notate that number. You can say in the description of the job, when they ask you the job description, like what do you, write what you do, say, note, this is the salary is, given without having completed due diligence or understanding the role thoroughly and how you compensate. So look, consider it tentative, right? And then later on, you can always negotiate a much higher one. You can say, now that I know what the role is, now I've done my research, I see that it's much higher than what I put in the application, right? So that's how I would do it. How are cover letters? If they're good cover letters, they're very important, okay? So if they're boring cover letters, they're not going to help you. I guess that they could hurt you too if they're really not great. So you want to write a cover letter that ideally, there's a posting, you want to tie the cover letter points directly to some of the things in the posting. In fact, one technique for cover letters that you can use is like your requirements versus my qualifications. Now, you don't have to pull out every one of their 20 requirements because you're going to have a 10-page cover letter, but pull out a few of them, put quotes around it and say, must have experience in X, and then say, I have experience in X. In fact, I have 10 years of experience. Here are a couple of examples and maybe have a couple of bullet points. So that's how you want to do the cover letters. Any comments on how to network effectively if you haven't changed jobs in a long time? I have a ton of comments on how to network effectively. I could talk for a whole day on how to network effectively. I'll just say quickly, you want to think very broadly about your network. Everyone's in your network. It's and everyone meaning anyone who might be open to helping you, even if you haven't talked to them in 15 years, they're open to helping you. You know, I had a client who hadn't worked, noticed that this guy who we went to business school with 18 years earlier was worked at this company he wanted to work at in a senior role. So he hadn't talked to him in 18 years, but he reached out to him. He ended up getting an interview. So that's what I mean by your network. The other thing about networking that's very important is keeping in touch. You want to keep in touch with people so nothing slips through the cracks. You have a meeting, you have an informational meeting, make sure you follow up with them, just hello and update. It just could be as simple as that. You don't have to be super brilliant in your updates. Just to keep top of mind. You don't have to say what's the status or ask any questions, annoying questions. They know why you're following up, but just keep in touch so they don't forget about you. Okay? So let me see, is there any other question here? If you're told you're overqualified for the job you want and interviewed for, well, that's gonna, let me just say, you don't ever want to hear that. So, I mean, sometimes you will, but the way you can preempt that is by making sure you're not sharing your experience in a way that makes you sound you're overqualified. Like if you're going for a more junior role, don't say, I've managed teams of 1,000 people, right? Because that's gonna just make them think you're overqualified. So be careful there, number one. And number two, you want to, if they say you're overqualified, if they say you're overqualified, you could say, can you explain? I would ask for more information, because overqualified, it really usually means, again, you're going to want too much money. You're going to be, just like with the age thing, you're going to be bored. You're not going to stick around. That's probably the biggest thing. You're going to be bored. You're not going to stick around. So you can say, what does that mean to you, that my being overqualified? Are you concerned I'm not going to be motivated? I'm not interested enough? Like, probe a little bit. So then you can address it. The last question, I'll just do this. We're just past one. Any thoughts, you know, and I'll take, if there's any other questions, I'll take them. I'll stay on a couple more minutes. Any thoughts about networking and interviewing in the COVID world? Easier, harder, different approaches required? Well, the obvious one is, you know, virtual, right, with Zoom. So I think that in terms of networking, in a way, it's sometimes easier because you can have less in-person meetings, which take a lot of time. It frees up your time because everybody's still doing things virtually. So in that sense, it's good. In terms of so it's just, what you need to do is, I think you got to be more conscious about setting up. It's a little bit harder, like let's grab a cup of coffee. It's super casual, right? You can't quite do that as easily. It's a little bit more uncomfortable, but people are getting used to doing that. You just got to get over your sort of trepidation about saying, hey, let's have a conversation. Let's just have a virtual coffee. Like, you should do that. And the other thing is just make sure that when you go on interviews, that your Zoom background looks good. Like, you know, you don't want to have like some depressing scene behind you. You want to make sure the lighting is good so it highlights you. Like if you wear glasses, if there's a big glare on your glasses, they can't see your eyes. That's not great. You know, things like that. Make sure it looks like you're looking at them. That means you have to be looking at the camera. So you want to make sure you're looking at them, those kinds of things. All right, so I'm not seeing any other questions. So I guess we're done. So I just want to wish you all much success with your interviews, and I hope you all get what you want, and hope to maybe perhaps talk with you again and see you again on another webinar. Take care.
That was great. And thank you, Robert. And thanks to everyone that
Sure.
connected with us today. Look for an event survey to follow, including this replay, and the link to Robert's presentation is enclosed here. Thank you so much.